Food! We all need food. While you're probably shoving some food in your dumb mouth right now. I'm sorry, I don't know where that energy came from. Food lore in D&D has always been a little bit strange. There's actually an abundance of it, but it's never been front and center. It's actually usually off stage left under a pile of coats that the guests brought in. But I'd like to talk about food lore in Dungeons & Dragons today, in this very video, and I'm going to do my best to not make it all about cheese. A substantive portion of it will be about cheese. Cheese is just strange in Dungeons & Dragons. There's a lot of weird cheeses. I don't want to focus on cheese, but I kind of have to. It's like Dragon Age. This isn't about Dragon Age. I do a Dungeons & Dragons videos here, but cheese has a weird place in Dragon Age. Just look it up. Cheese just weirdly important in Dragon Age. But we're not here to talk about Dragon Age. Let's talk about Dungeons & Dragons. So cheese. Well, Dungeons & Dragons cheese specifically. Cheese is weird in D&D lore. You would not expect cheese to come from some kind of stinky hell beast, or a cheese that's so addictive it creates a vicious street gang fueled by addiction, or even a cheese that's just kind of weirdly transparent. So let's break these down. I promise the video is not all about cheese. It's a lot about cheese. Alright, starting with the first one. Let's talk about death cheese. I did make a short about this that you might have seen and you might not have seen, and if you didn't, I'm very disappointed in you. Death cheese is a special type of cheese made by monks, and death cheese can only be created with the milk of a Catoblepas, which sounds like a thing I made up, but I didn't. It's a real monster. It's this bizarre dinosaur cow hellbeast creature with a big clubbed tail and a noxious stench that surrounds it, and it has death ray eyes. So milking it is not easy, but that's what you need to do to create death cheese. That's where the name comes from. You might die making the death cheese. But once you've made the death cheese, it's actually pretty good and a little expensive. Very flavorful, rich texture, kind of a harder cheese. Next up, onto the drug cheese. I'm talking about Luiren Spring Cheese. Luiren? It's a tough name. I don't know how to pronounce it. Luiren Spring Cheese, also known as Halfling's Cheese, or Mind Cheese, or Cheese. I didn't make that up. It's basically halfling crack, kind of. It's a highly addictive cheese that only affects halflings, and when the halflings ingest it, they have this kind of euphoric effect, kind of like being drunk, but if they stop eating it, they start to get the shakes and the jitters, and they start to hallucinate and get cramps. It's rough. The origins of the cheese itself are a little bit foggy and perhaps a bit dubious. Apparently a human by the names of Jorenbel used it to get a bunch of halflings hooked and then use them as his personal crack addict gang in the city. It's crazy. The weirdest thing about it is it only works on halflings. If a human eats it, or a dwarf or an elf, it has no effect. It's just an okay tasting, kind of like a blue cheese. It was originally introduced in a 1990 Forgotten Realms comic, but since then it has appeared in one adventure in 2nd edition called Kidnapped, and it showed up in the Neverwinter Nights Darkness and Dagger for video games, only by reference. And lastly, the weird see-through cheese, which I don't know why it weirds me out more than the death cheese and the drug cheese. Mist cheese, also known as ethereal cheese or loud water mist, is a special elven cheese that when you cut it thinly, it's translucent and you can see through. Which is weird, right? Not a lot is said about how it has this property or the specific making process, but like a lot of food items in the Forgotten Realms, information about this comes from a book called Aurora's Whole Realms Catalog, where a lot of information about the food in the Forgotten Realms and in Dungeons & Dragons and Toril comes from. If you can track down a copy, it's a pretty good read because it focuses on kind of the mundane items of the Forgotten Realms and Toril. It goes through all manner of household goods, adventuring equipment, food items, spices, drinks, basically anything and everything that isn't a magical item, armor, or weapon. And it's pretty informative. Gives you information about where it comes from, gives you pricing, and gives you a pretty good breakdown. If you can track one down, I recommend giving it a read. So I'm mostly done with cheese talk, but we're still talking about food in Dungeons & Dragons. So I want to talk to you about Foodoman. foodomancy. Again, not a thing I made up. Foodomancy, the lost wizard school of magic, is the magic of creating food. It's basically a school of magic for magical chefs, and there used to be a whole book about this. Back in the year of our Lord 1998, the Gentle Art of Foodomancy by Jeff Quick was teaching players the magic of cooking, and it had some pretty cool stuff in there, where you could create all kinds of culinary delights for other players, including things like a dragon stew that would give you skin like dragon scales and resistance to fire damage, or a basilisk sandwich which would give you stone skin and perhaps the basilisk's gaze. Man, we used to have all this cool shit back in 2nd edition. Why don't we do cool stuff anymore? Come on, 5th edition guys, get your head together. Alright, now we gotta talk about one of the most powerful organizations in Waterdeep. I'm talking, of course, of the Waterdeep Bakers Guild. An organization that you absolutely did not know was a thing until I said it just now. However, the Waterdeep's Bakers Guild is a very powerful and influential organization in Waterdeep. It's, of course, where all the foremost and most influential and skilled bakers in all of Faerun gather. And in fact, they have their own special runners. They have trained bodyguards and runners that move their baked goods and pastries throughout the city, that are trained to defend the baked goods and track down any thieves if such an occasion does come up. They also are given free reign by the City Watch to go wherever they need to go to deliver baked goods. Now, the leader of this powerful and influential organization was a man by the name of Dundold Boldharas. Say that 3 times fast. But Dundold Boldharas was just human, and he was the leader of the guild about 80 years ago, so we have no idea who the current leader of the guild is. Who's the leader of the Bakers Guild, Watsy? Who's the leader? I'll tell you who the leader is. Whoever you, the Dungeon Master, decide to make the leader of the Bakers Guild of Waterdeep. You get that for free now. So yeah, like I said, the lore around D&D food stuff is kind of weird. And I guess part of that is that a lot of it's just kind of mundane stuff that we have in our world. Carrots, potatoes, onions, corn, peas, beans, the usual. Stuff you find in the grocery store that's not like, made. Things only get kind of strange and fantastical with D&D food somewhat randomly, where you get your translucent elf cheese and your drug cheeses. And I want to be clear here, I mean in no way to imply that the lore built up around foodstuffs in Dungeons and Dragons is lazy. There's actually quite a bit of work put into it. In fact, there's this whole global trade thing going on when it comes to some more exotic foods. For example, a lot of your exotic fruits come from the jungles of Cholt, or all the way across the sea in Maztica. I didn't get it wrong that time. It's also well documented in the lore that a lot of exotic goods, things like coffee, corn, chili peppers, things like that, come from Maztica. And there's also a rich tapestry of imported goods that come from the east. When you go to places like Karatur, you get imported goods such as various teas, noodles, and some of the more exotic fruits and vegetables that you associate with Asian cuisine that I am not going to attempt to list or pronounce right now. There's also a ton of rich lore when it comes to beverages. There are literally dozens upon dozens of different kinds of ales and wines throughout the Forgotten Realms. Nearly every small town tavern that you're going to run into when you're running your D&D games and when you're doing your D&D lore likely has some kind of in-house produced local ale that they're distributing at the tavern. And just for fun, I'm going to read aloud a list of notable ales found throughout the Forgotten Realms with no context that I found on the Forgotten Realms wiki. Ready? Start the timer. Aftermath Abbey Ale, Averner's Abyssal Ale, Baldur's Gate Pale, Baldur's Gate Red Ale, Bellbuck Bitter Ale, Bitter Black, Bitter Root Beer, Black Bottom, Black Grog Ale, Crystal Ale 2, Electric Boogaloo, Deep Ale, Dark Lake Stout, Darndar, Deadman's Ale, Dragon's Breath Beer, Elder Root Stout, Elminster's Choice, Fire Sword, Frost Kiss Ale, Golden Sands Brews, Green Tart, Highwater Ale, Irie Borin North Brew, Lorian's Best, Mulhorandi Dark, Night Ale, Old Black Goblin, Ogre-Fire Ale, Ol One Eye, Railer's Red, Regal Eagle Ale, Rock Grit, Rock-Stained Ale, Saman, Samark, Samsark. Sorry, Samsark, not Samark. Shadow Dark Ale, Silvery Moon Ale, Sleeping Dragon Dark, Stout, Slow Stout, Spruce Beer Stint, Suzzle, Tangier Stout, Wizard's Quaff, and Worm Whiz. Those are all real, by the way, probably worth the Google. And those are just the well-known ales. Also, weirdly, there's no documentation of any non-alcoholic drinks in the Forgotten Realms lore. At least not any that I could find. And I dug deep. Other than milk and water. So I guess everybody's getting crunk. Now, when it comes to wine, there's way more variety as well, and wines in the Forgotten Realms are broken up into some pretty familiar types. We got red wines, we got white wines, fortified wines, mulled, spice, and sweetened wines, and then other. I'm not going to list them all here. Again, go to Forgotten Realms Wiki. They have a really incredible list. I highly recommend looking at it. But if you're running a game and you want to just think of a really cool, fancy wine to add to a party or an event or some kind of scene that you're setting up with characters, use Elverquist. Elverquist is a fancy elven wine. It's apparently made from various fruits and distilled sunshine. It has kind of a ruby color and contains flecks of gold. Weird rich people shit. Like I said, there's a ton of different wines out there. Again, there's a really great list online. I'm not going to list them because, frankly, the names aren't as funny as the ale names. And that's a personal call that I had to make. Speaking of wine, did you know that wine genies were a thing? And not like a fun product that you see advertised late at night, like literal wine genies. They're known as winemaker genies. They're from the land of Zakara, which is a place you've never heard of. Mostly because it was largely featured in our good old friend 2nd edition, and it was featured in a couple comic books, some lore books, and a few novels as well. But winemaker genies are supposed to be a kind of subspecies of marids, which explains why they look like some kind of weird hybrid of a cat and an elephant. Yep, I'd love to see somebody put together that evolutionary chart. Yeah, apparently they worked in Zakara, they ran huge vineyards, and they were noble marids that were punished for transgressions against the Marid court in the Elemental Plane, and now they've got to go make wine and be elephant cats. It's weird. Have I said the lore is very strange? Because the lore is very strange. Oh, one last thing. I guess we're going back to ale. So, Dwarven Holy Water is actually ale. Stereotypes aside, it's actually a true story. So, Dwarven Holy Water is actually ale, and Dwarven clerics, when they are petitioning to become the new court cleric for a Dwarven ruler, will brew up special holy water for everyone to try. And the Dwarven king and the king's court will all try the different types of holy water brewed by the various clerics, and they will choose who gets to be court cleric based on the one they like the best. It's kind of like some weird craft brew festival, but in exchange you get a really lucrative career as a court cleric. We actually see this ritual happen in the Forgotten Realms books. When King Brunner Battlehammer of Mithril Hall loses his court cleric to a drow attack, he starts to audition new people to be his new court cleric. And they all come in and all the dwarves get real drunk on the various types of ale before selecting the one that they all liked to taste best. So yeah, if you weren't already going to make a dwarf cleric who was also a brewer, now you have that idea. But that's all I have to say about Dungeons & Dragons food lore. It was just a lot of really interesting facts that I wanted to put together. Originally I was going to do a video about how there's just a bunch of weird random facts in D&D lore that you probably don't know about, and then I realized most of them are food related, so I made a food video instead. But that's it. Thanks for watching. If you got any weird D&D food lore that I didn't include here, feel free to put it down in the comments. If you think I'm full of shit and you want to call me out on something, put that down in the comments as well. I also want to highlight, if you want to play a game of Dungeons & Dragons with me, I am a dungeon master on startplaying.games, and I've got a lot of games with a lot of open seats throughout the week, so you can check those out in the link down below, and I'll throw up a little screen there. And that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, puck out.